Good morning and annyeonghaseyo to you all this morning. My name is Patrick and I'm in charge of the Artificial Intelligence Department with SDS Americas in the San Jose office. In the last few months, we set ourselves the task of detecting COVID-19 based on an X-ray image of a person's lung. And that's what I'll tell you about today. So as you know, COVID-19, of course, is a terrible disease that struck our planet. And at the moment, the symptoms are very similar to the symptoms of flu or pneumonia, a very benign disease that everybody gets every once in a while. So detecting whether or not you have COVID or pneumonia is a fairly important task. When you feel a little fever and difficulty breathing, what you would do is go to a testing site and they would give you a nasal swab test. I'm sure many of you have done that. It effectively is a little complicated Q-tip that is stuck in your nose, and then that is analyzed in a chemical laboratory. There's also a rapid test available that does that more quickly, but both of these tests are not accurate to 100% accuracy. So if the test comes back negative, saying that you do not have COVID-19, you cannot be certain that that is the case. It's only accurate to 94% in the case of the full nasal swab test and 90% accurate in the rapid test kit. But the normal test takes approximately 1 or 2 days, depending on where you live, to be returned to you. Now, if you have a difficult time breathing, you require medication, it is essential that the doctors know very quickly whether you have this disease or that disease. And so detecting COVID very quickly becomes important, especially for the elderly or people with other diseases that would make more trouble for COVID. So a lung X-ray is something that is very easy to do. Virtually every hospital and many doctors' offices have an X-ray machine. Taking a lung X-ray is something that can be done virtually instantaneously. And based on that image, the question is, can we detect COVID? Now, since I'm talking to you today at the Techtonic conference, of course, the answer to that is yes, we can, in fact, detect it. Now, as any artificial intelligence task, in order to learn an artificial intelligence model, you need data. Now, we're very thankful to the company called Cloud Factory for providing a data set to this extent. It's a publicly available, open source, free of charge data set that you can get on the internet. It has just over 15,000 people's lung X-rays, and they have been labeled by expert physicians. So there are, I believe, 6 physicians that have gone through all of these images and have labeled that a certain X-ray is from a person who is healthy, certain X-rays are from people who have pneumonia, and then certain X-rays are from people who have COVID-19. Now, you can appreciate that getting a hold of this data set is difficult because there are all sorts of privacy laws to do with medical data. It is time consuming to label these images because these physicians, of course, have to be expertly trained to recognize these diseases based on that sort of image. Not just anybody like myself can go and label these images. I wouldn't know where to start. So it is expensive and time consuming to produce a data set like this, which is why for many cases that are comparable to this one, no data set exists and therefore no artificial intelligence exists. And so a crucial problem that underpins all of this is, are we able to learn an accurate artificial intelligence model based on relatively little data? So the past couple of decades, you've heard many things being said about big data. Actually, the state of the art right now is to look at small data, because in many cases like this one, getting access to more data is either very difficult, very expensive, or not possible. So in this case, we set ourselves this task. let's have a look at the data set. As I said, about 15,000 images. Most of them are normal lungs. Many of them are pneumonia lungs, and relatively few of them are COVID-19 cases. Now, this is partly due to the fact that COVID-19, at the time that this was assembled a few months ago, was still a relatively rare disease. But nonetheless, it is a so-called imbalanced data set where the three categories we have are represented not in the same frequency. And so the COVID images have to be oversampled so that the three varieties become comparable. Also, the images have to be pre-processed or so-called registered so that the images really do become comparable. For example, if I take an X-ray, then there are parts of the neck visible in it. There are parts of the shoulders and my ribs that are visible in the image, and I don't need them because I'm only wanting to focus on the lungs of the patient. So I have to cut out the lungs of the image, and we do that, of course, automatically. So it's a cropping mechanism that prepares the image for processing. Next comes the selection of features. A central piece in the process of data science is to select the features of the data set. These are the parts, if you will, of the data set that offer the most information towards the problem I'm solving for. In this case, which disease is represented there. Typically speaking, features are designed by people based on human intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And this is one of the pieces where domain expertise, or in that case, medical knowledge, is inserted into the artificial intelligence. However, we can save ourselves that work as well because in recent years, methods have been developed to automatically generate and select the right features for image data sets as well as for other kinds of data sets to arrive at the optimal feature set. And this engineering is done fully automatically without requiring human participation, neither domain experts like doctors, nor the participation of data scientists like myself. And part of it is done by saying a part of an image is a feature of an image. So for example, take the image of my face that you're looking at right now. That is the complete image of a face, and you might identify it either as a human or as Patrick if you know, if you've seen my face before. So a feature of that image is, for example, just this part of my face. So let's say you have just this. That is a feature. This part is another feature. And you can stick these features together, and in that way, you can learn unsupervised what are the features that allow you to detect a human versus a non-human, or Patrick versus other people. And that's what was done in this case to correctly identify features of the lungs that give the most information towards the question, COVID or pneumonia. After all this preparation is done, we apply a methodology called active learning, which is effectively a conversation between the human person who labels the image and the AI algorithm that is supposed to detect which disease it has. Now, ordinarily speaking, when you label pieces of data to be stuck in an AI algorithm, the order doesn't matter. You label them in whatever order you find those data points. However, that is not good because the order clearly does matter. Suppose that you have two images that are very similar to each other. After you've labeled the first, the second image adds virtually no information. So why label it? The labeling is an effortful activity, and so we don't need to label that second image. Now, you can manage this appropriately if you sort the data set in order of information gain from the most information to the least, but you cannot do that a priori. You can only do that in sequence by labeling little pieces at a time. So what you would do is you would label a small piece of the data set and give that to the algorithm. It would choose the images it's most confused about and present you those. You label them, give it back to the algorithm. It chooses the next most confused images and gives them back to you. We did this in 1% increments in this particular data set, and we found that the accuracy of the AI model increases, as you see in the green curve on the left-hand side of your screen there. So the accuracy just shoots up quickly and then levels off and doesn't really improve after that. And you can see that once we hit 16% labeled data, we have reached the highest accuracy that we're going to get. The other 84% of the images add effort, they add data, but they do not add any more information. All the information is contained in the first 16% of the images, if they are ordered correctly, which is the secret sauce of this game plan. So you've just saved yourself 84% of the manual effort and of the financial expense in generating that data set. That is part of the secret sauce that has flown into this. Now, this conversation has to be backed up by computational means. You'll recall that I have 15,000 images, and I label them in 1% increments, so every increment is 150 images. It doesn't take very long to label one image, perhaps about 30 seconds. So 150 images can be labeled relatively quickly. They can be labeled in an hour or so. So that means every hour when I'm done labeling 1% of these images, I will want the AI to analyze it, sort the other images, and give me back the next 1%. It has to be able to do that quickly, for which I want the AI model to be trained quickly. Now, AI, as you know, takes a long time to train, but we can reduce the time it takes by doing it distributively across multiple computers, having multiple GPUs each. And of course, the product by Samsung SDS that is capable of doing this is the Brightix AI Accelerator, which takes your training task, scales it linearly across a network of possibly hundreds of GPUs, does the training task very quickly, and provides that answer back to the human being so that you can do active learning in virtually real-time speeds. Having done all this, we will find that the accuracy of the model that we're able to achieve is at 95% compared to a state-of-the-art model, which is accurate to 91%. So already we've elevated the accuracy by 4%, and we've done this using only 16% of the data. So we're able to get a better model with a lot less data, and that is where really the accomplishment lies here. Finally, here's the confusion matrix that is usually presented in classification tasks. On the left-hand side, you see the confusion matrix for the state-of-the-art model that was the best model prior to our study. On the right-hand side, now how to read this matrix is in the vertical axis down the side, you find the categories that are correct about the lung. And on the horizontal axis across, you find the category that the artificial intelligence identifies. So for example, if I'm looking at pneumonia cases, I have to look at the middle line. And then I find that a pneumonia case is determined to be normal with 7% of the time. So that's how to read that matrix. And you can see that COVID-19 is detected correctly in 95% of all cases by our model, and we make a mistake in the other 5% of the time. Sometimes we diagnose it to be normal in 3% and pneumonia in 2% of all cases. Again, this is a better accuracy than the baseline model. In fact, it is also a better accuracy than the nasal swab test, which is only 94% accurate. So we find that we actually are better than a chemicals test that is done in a laboratory, which is a major accomplishment for artificial intelligence. So since this really pushes the boundaries, last week we actually filed for a patent for this technology so that we can make sure that Samsung gets its fair share. So that presents really our study, how to detect COVID-19 using just a lung X-ray of a person. And I'll conclude that we ended up with a state-of-the-art model that is better than previous models, better than laboratory models, and that could now be effectively used in real time to diagnose people with COVID. Having said all this, I say thank you very much for your attention, and I'd like to answer your questions.
네, 발표 잘 들었습니다. 모두의 과제가 되어버린 코로나19가 곧 해결될 거라는 희망을 가져봅니다. 발표가 진행되는 동안 많은 분들께서 좋은 질문을 주셨는데요. 그중에 몇 가지를 직접 여쭤보도록 하겠습니다. Q&A는 통역을 담당하시는 SDS 송정화 프로께서 도와주실 예정입니다.
So we have two questions. First question is, how much time can you save when you apply active learning?
Yeah, good question. So as I said, we had 100% images and had to label only 16% of them. That means the other 84% of the data was not labeled by a person, it was labeled by the AI model. Now, those 84% of the data have to be checked by a human being. That's of course faster than labeling it itself, but it still represents a small amount of work. So the amount of man hours doesn't go down from 100 to 16, it goes down approximately from 100 to 30, so we save round about 70% of the manual effort.
Thank you. Okay, here's the second question. In the data science life cycle, which step is most important?
The most important step is definitely preparing your data set. So you need to have a data set that is representative of the situation. In this case, we needed to have lung X-rays. It needs to be representative of the problem, which in this case is separating COVID from pneumonia at normal, which is actually our problem because the data set was not balanced. We had too many normal and pneumonia cases. So we had to balance the data set by oversamplifying the pneumonia cases. That gave us the data set that we needed to have. That is the most important and usually also the most time-consuming activity in data science.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation and answers.
Thank you very much.